The obese girl was left behind in the storm. The mountain man's act lit up the darkest night forever. The wagon train had been moving since dawn. 15 families stretched across the frozen Wyoming plain like beads on a fraying string. November 1826 had arrived with a vengeance, bringing winds that cut through wool and leather as if they were nothing but cotton gauze. Constance Merriweather walked beside the last wagon, her breath forming white clouds in the crystalline air, her thick frame wrapped in layers of patched clothing that never seemed quite enough. At 23, Constance had known little kindness in her life. Orphaned at 8 when cholera swept through her family's Missouri homestead, she had been passed from one reluctant guardian to another until this wagon train, led by the stern Thomas Caldwell, had agreed to let her work for her passage west. Her body, round and heavy from an affliction the frontier doctors couldn't name or treat, made her an object of cruel whispers and barely concealed contempt. The thyroid condition that plagued her went undiagnosed in this era of limited medical knowledge, leaving her to bear both the physical burden and the social stigma of her appearance. "Move along, Constance," barked Jacob Winters, his weathered face twisted in perpetual irritation. "Your wagon's falling behind again. At this pace, we'll never reach Fort Bridger before the real snows hit." She lowered her head and pushed harder against the wagon's resistance, her strong arms straining. Despite the mockery she endured, Constance's endurance was remarkable. She could haul loads that would exhaust men half her size, work from dawn until long after dark without complaint, and survive on portions that would leave others hollow with hunger. Yet none of this earned her respect, only resentment for being different, for taking up space in a world that valued only lean efficiency and conventional beauty. The sky had been growing darker all morning, a peculiar greenish gray that made the horses skittish, and the more experienced travelers exchange worried glances. By noon, the first snowflakes began to fall, not the gentle dancing flakes of a moderate storm, but hard pellets of ice that stung exposed skin like angry wasps. "Storm's coming in fierce," muttered old Pete Morrison, the train's scout riding back from the forward position. His face, creased like old leather, held genuine concern. "Worst I've seen in 30 years on these plains. We need to find shelter, Thomas. Now." Thomas Caldwell, a tall man with shoulders broad from years of farming, surveyed the endless white expanse ahead and behind. His jaw set in that stubborn line his wife knew meant trouble. "We're only 15 miles from the fort. We push through. I'll not lose another day to weather." "Thomas, this isn't ordinary weather," Pete insisted, his voice rising above the wind. "This is a killer storm. We need to—" "We push through," Thomas repeated, his voice final. Within an hour, his decision revealed itself as catastrophic. The wind increased to a howling fury, driving snow so thick that visibility dropped to mere feet. The temperature plummeted, and ice began forming on everything: wagon wheels, horse manes, human eyelashes. The train slowed to a crawl, then stopped entirely as families huddled in their wagons, trying desperately to maintain heat. Constance sat alone in her supply wagon, teeth chattering despite the 3 blankets wrapped around her shoulders. She'd been given the oldest wagon, the one with gaps in the boards that let the wind whistle through. No family had offered to let her share their space. She was used to this isolation, but tonight, as the storm's fury intensified, fear began to creep into her heart like ice water. The meeting of the family heads happened around Thomas's wagon, their lanterns creating a small circle of wavering light in the white chaos. Constance couldn't hear the words, but she saw the gestures, the pointing in her direction, the nodding heads. Her stomach tightened with dread. Thomas himself came to deliver the verdict, his face hard as granite, but his eyes unable to meet hers. "Constance, the council has decided. Your wagon is slowing us down. The axle's cracked, and we can't risk the whole train for one person. We're leaving you supplies, blankets, some food, firewood." When the storm passes, you can make your way to the fort on foot. It's only a day's walk in good weather." The words hit her like physical blows. "You're leaving me? Here? In this storm?" "It's just one night," Thomas said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You're strong. You'll survive." "Please," Constance whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this. I'll work harder. But Thomas had already turned away, unable to bear the sight of what he was doing. One by one, the wagons began to move, creaking and groaning as they disappeared into the white wall of the blizzard. Constance stood alone in the howling wind, watching the last lantern light fade into nothingness, listening to the sound of her own heart breaking. The storm intensified with nightfall, as if nature itself was outraged by the cruelty she'd witnessed. Constance's hands shook violently as she tried to build a fire with the meager supplies left behind. A handful of damp wood, one thin blanket, and a small pouch of jerky that wouldn't last 2 days. The matches in her numb fingers kept slipping, falling into the snow where they became useless. "Please, God," she prayed through chattering teeth, finally coaxing a tiny flame to life. "Please don't let me die alone in the dark." The fire was pathetic, barely larger than a candle's flame, consuming the wood faster than she could have imagined. She knew with terrible certainty that it would burn out within hours, and then she would have nothing between herself and the killing cold. The temperature had dropped to at least 25 degrees below zero, possibly colder. The wind chill would make it deadly within hours of exposure. Constance's mind drifted as hypothermia began its insidious work. She thought of her mother, dead these 15 years, whose gentle hands had once braided her hair and told her she was beautiful just as she was. She thought of the father who'd taught her to read by firelight, who'd never made her feel ashamed of her body. She thought of all the small kindnesses she had experienced in her short life and found they were pitifully few. "I forgive you," she whispered into the storm, meaning Thomas and the others. "I forgive you because hate would freeze my heart faster than this cold." Phew. The fire was dying. Her last match was gone. The wind howled like a living thing, furious and hungry. Constance closed her eyes and began to pray, not for rescue, that seemed impossible, but for peace, for a gentle passage from this world of cold and cruelty to whatever came next. That's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a horse's whinny, strong and close. Then a voice, deep and commanding, cutting through the wind. "Hello, the fire! Is someone there?" Constance tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper. The cold had stolen her strength. She watched through half-frozen eyes as a massive figure on horseback materialized from the blizzard, wrapped in furs and leather, carrying a rifle across his back. The man dismounted in one fluid motion and was beside her in seconds. "Good God," he breathed, taking in her condition. "How long have you been out here?" "Left me," Constance managed to whisper. "Wagon. Too slow." The stranger's jaw tightened, and something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "They left you in this? Those bastards left a woman alone in a killer storm?" He didn't wait for an answer. Moving with practiced efficiency, he pulled a massive bearskin from his saddlebag and wrapped it around Constance, lifting her as if she weighed nothing despite her size. "My name's Silas Brennan. I've got a talent for not dying in weather that kills other folks. You hear me? You're not dying tonight. I give you my word on that, and I've never broken a promise in my life." Constance wanted to believe him, but her body was shutting down. She felt herself slipping away, the cold becoming almost comfortable, like falling asleep in a warm bed. "No!" Silas's voice snapped her back. "You don't get to quit on me, woman. What's your name?" Constance. "Well, Constance, you're going to stay awake and talk to me. That's an order." He'd already built a new fire, using something from his pack that made the flames roar to life with startling intensity. Bear fat, she would learn later, rendered and stored for exactly this kind of emergency. The fire grew large and hot, pushing back the darkness, creating a circle of light and warmth in the midst of the frozen hell. Silas pulled out a tin cup and melted snow over the fire, adding something from a flask. "Whiskey and honey," he explained, holding the warm cup to her lips. "Drink slowly. It'll burn, but it'll bring you back." The liquid was fire going down, but it was the first warmth Constance had felt in her core for hours. She coughed, sputtered, and felt a tiny spark of life returning. "That's it," Silas encouraged. "Fight for it. You're tougher than you know." He fed the fire constantly, burning through his supplies with abandon. When his prepared wood ran low, he began breaking apart an extra sled he carried, then started on a spare saddle. Constance watched in amazement through clearing vision, as this stranger literally burned his possessions to keep her alive. "Your things," she protested weakly. "You'll need—" "Things can be replaced," Silas cut her off, his voice firm. "People can't. Besides, I meant what I said. I gave you my word. I'd burn every damn thing I own, including my clothes, before I'd let you die on my watch." As the hours passed and the storm raged on, Silas kept Constance talking, refusing to let her slip into the dangerous sleep of hypothermia. He was a mountain man, she learned, who'd spent 20 years in these territories trapping, hunting, and surviving conditions that would kill most men within days. He'd developed an almost supernatural ability to navigate in weather that blinded others, reading wind patterns and snowdrifts like other men read books. "Why were you out in this?" Constance asked during a moment when her strength returned slightly. Silas's expression darkened. "Taking supplies to my cabin, 15 miles north of here. Would have made it too, except I saw your fire. Tiniest spark of light in all this white death, but I saw it. Almost thought I was imagining it. It was so small." "God sent you," Constance whispered. "Maybe he did," Silas acknowledged, his weathered face softening. "Or maybe I'm just too stubborn to mind my own business. Either way, here we are." As the night deepened, Silas told her stories to keep her conscious, tales of grizzly bear encounters, of winters spent alone in mountain caves, of rivers crossed on breaking ice, of Native American friends who'd taught him to read the land. His voice was rough but kind, and Constance found herself clinging to it like a lifeline. "Can I tell you something?" she asked as dawn began to gray the eastern sky. "Something I've never told anyone?" "I'm listening." "I was going to give up. Before you came, I was ready to let go. I thought maybe the world would be better without me taking up space in it." Silas was quiet for a long moment, feeding another piece of wood to the fire. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I knew a girl once back in Kentucky. My sister Sarah. She was different too. Born with one leg shorter than the other. Folks were cruel about it. She took her own life when she was 16. Couldn't bear the shame anymore." He paused, swallowing hard. "I was 14, and I couldn't stop her. Couldn't make her see what I saw, that she was worth 10 of the people who mocked her. I've spent 20 years wishing I'd done more, said more. So when I saw your fire tonight, when I realized someone was in trouble, I wasn't going to fail again." Constance felt tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'm sorry about Sarah." "So am I," Silas said quietly. "Every damn day. But Constance, you listen to me now. Your body isn't wrong. The world's wrong for making you feel ashamed of it. You're out here surviving what would kill most people. You hauled wagons that grown men struggled with. You've got more strength in your little finger than those cowards who left you had in their whole bodies." The storm broke as the sun rose, revealing a world transformed into crystalline beauty, and revealing how close to death Constance had truly been. The spot where Silas found her was a full half-mile from where the wagon train had abandoned her. She'd wandered in the storm, disoriented, and it was pure chance or divine intervention that Silas had spotted her tiny fire. Silas loaded Constance onto his horse, a magnificent bay gelding named Thunder, and began the journey to his cabin. She was weak, suffering from severe frostbite on her fingers and toes, but alive. The cabin, when they reached it 3 hours later, was a revelation. Solid, well-built, with a stone fireplace and shelves lined with supplies. "You'll stay here until you're healed," Silas announced, brooking no argument. "Then we're going to have a conversation with that wagon train master about the law regarding abandonment." "The law?" Constance asked, surprised. "Wyoming territory has laws against leaving people to die," Silas explained grimly. "What they did to you is a crime. Probably won't hang for it, but they'll answer for it." Over the next 2 weeks, Silas nursed Constance back to health with a gentleness that surprised her. He treated her frostbite, prepared nourishing meals, and never once made her feel ashamed of needing help. Slowly, she regained her strength and discovered something unexpected. "Your body retains heat better than most," Silas observed one morning as they sat by the fire. "That extra layer of natural insulation that people mock you for? It probably saved your life last night. A thinner person would have frozen faster. Your body is built for survival in harsh conditions. It's actually an advantage out here." The words struck Constance like lightning. She'd spent her entire life being told her body was wrong, a burden, something to be ashamed of. Now this mountain man was telling her it had saved her life, that it was suited for survival. The revelation was transformative. When Constance was strong enough, Silas made good on his promise. They rode to Fort Bridger, where the wagon train had arrived days earlier. The confrontation in the fort commander's office was explosive. "Mr. Caldwell," Commander Phillips said coldly, "you're aware that abandoning a member of your party in life-threatening conditions is a criminal offense in this territory?" Thomas Caldwell's face went white. "She was slowing us down. The whole train was at risk." "So you condemned her to death to save yourselves," Silas said, his voice deadly quiet. "You took the supplies she had hauled for 1,500 miles and left her with scraps. You didn't even check if she could build a fire properly." "We thought." "You didn't think," Constance spoke up, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "You saw someone you considered expendable, and you made the easiest choice for yourselves. But I want you to know something, Mr. Caldwell. I forgive you, not because what you did was acceptable, but because I won't let your cruelty poison what's left of my life." The fort commander fined Thomas Caldwell heavily and revoked his license to lead wagon trains. More than that, word spread throughout the fort about what had happened. Thomas and his family found themselves shunned, treated with the same contempt they'd shown Constance. Spring came to the Wyoming territory with a burst of wildflowers and rushing meltwater, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost gentle. Constance had spent the winter at Silas's cabin, and during those long months, something unexpected had bloomed between them, something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. Silas taught her to hunt, to track, to read the weather signs in the clouds and the behavior of animals. Constance proved to be a natural shot with a rifle, her steady hands and calm patience making her deadly accurate. She also discovered a talent for tanning hides and preparing meat, skills that made her a valuable partner in the mountain man's lifestyle. "You know what's funny?" Silas said one evening as they sat outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "Folks down at the fort keep asking when you're heading back to civilization. They can't imagine anyone choosing this life." "Can't they?" Constance smiled. "This is the first place I've ever felt like I belonged, the first place where my strength mattered more than my appearance." Silas reached over and took her hand, calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I need to tell you something, Constance. These past months, they've been the best of my life. Having you here, having someone to talk to share this life with, it's made me realize how lonely I've been all these years." Constance's heart began to race. "Silas, let me finish," he said softly. "I know we're different. You're educated, well-spoken, from a good family. I'm just a rough mountain man who spent more time with bears than people. But if you'd consider it, if you'd do me the honor, I'd like you to stay, not just for another season, but permanent-like, as my wife." The proposal was so unexpected that Constance couldn't speak for a moment. Then tears began rolling down her cheeks, not tears of sadness, but of joy so profound it overwhelmed her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Silas Brennan, I will marry you." They were married in June by the fort's chaplain, with old Pete Morrison standing as witness. Pete had left Thomas's train in disgust after learning what happened and had become a good friend to both of them. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, held outdoors with the mountains as their cathedral. The idea came to Constance during their first winter as a married couple, when a young family got lost in a storm not far from their cabin. They heard the father's desperate shouts and managed to guide them to safety before hypothermia set in. "This happens too often," Constance said that night, watching the rescued family sleep safely by their fire. "People underestimate these mountains, these storms. They die because they don't have shelter when they need it most." Silas looked at his wife with growing admiration. "What are you thinking?" "A rescue station," Constance said, her eyes bright with purpose. "Right here, where travelers can find it. We stock it with firewood, blankets, supplies. We keep watch during storm season. We save lives." It was ambitious, perhaps crazy, but Silas had learned never to underestimate his wife's determination. They spent that spring and summer building a larger structure adjacent to their cabin, a way station with supplies, bunks, and a massive stone fireplace that could heat the entire space. They carved trail markers leading to it, set up signal fires, and let every trapper, trader, and traveler know about the safe haven. The rescues began that next winter. First, a trapper with a broken leg who would have died of exposure without their help. Then, a family whose wagon had broken down in a storm. A Native American elder who'd gotten separated from his tribe. A young woman fleeing an abusive marriage who needed a safe place to heal and plan her next steps. Over the next decade, Constance and Silas saved more than 40 lives. Their rescue station became legendary throughout the territory, known as Brennan's Hope. Travelers left donations when they could, and a small but steady income from those gifts, combined with Silas's trapping and Constance's hide work, made them modestly prosperous. In the spring of 1834, 8 years after that terrible night in the storm, Constance made a discovery that filled her with both joy and terror. She was pregnant. At 31, after being told by multiple doctors that her thyroid condition made pregnancy unlikely if not impossible, she was carrying a child. "Are you sure?" Silas asked, his rough hands trembling as he held hers. "I'm sure," Constance said. "Silas, I'm frightened. The doctors said—" "The doctors don't know everything," Silas interrupted gently. "Your body has surprised everyone your whole life, including you. It survived when it shouldn't have. It adapted when others said it couldn't. It'll handle this too." The pregnancy was difficult. Constance's thyroid condition complicated everything, causing fatigue, swelling, and periods of dangerous lethargy. But she'd spent years building strength in these mountains, and that strength carried her through. Silas was with her every step, caring for her with the same devotion he'd shown that first night in the storm. Their daughter was born in November, during the first snowfall of the season, almost exactly 8 years after Silas had found Constance dying in the blizzard. They named her Sarah, after Silas's sister, and Hope, after the station that had become their life's work. Sarah Hope Brennan was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, her mother's determined chin, and her father's clear gray eyes. When Constance held her for the first time, she wept with a joy so complete it seemed impossible that she'd once wanted to die. "Look at her," Silas whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "She's beautiful, just like her mother." Constance looked up at her husband, this rough mountain man who'd saved her life and then given her a reason to live it fully. "I love you, Silas Brennan. You gave me back my life that night in the storm, but you've given me so much more since then. You gave me purpose, you gave me dignity, You gave me this: family, home, love. And you gave me everything I didn't know I was missing, Silas replied, kissing her forehead. You turned a lonely cabin into a home. You took my rough survival and made it a mission to help others. You showed me that saving one person can change the whole world. The years rolled on like the seasons, each bringing its own challenges and triumphs. Sarah grew into a strong, capable young woman who inherited her mother's compassion and her father's wilderness skills. She became essential to the rescue station's operation, often spotting lost travelers before her parents did, and riding out in all weather to guide them to safety. The rescue station expanded. Other mountain men and their families, inspired by the Brennan's example, established similar way stations throughout the territory. A network of safety grew across the frontier, and the death toll from winter storms dropped dramatically. Travelers began calling them hope stations, and the name spread across the West. In 1842, a railroad surveyor arrived at their door, nearly frozen from an unexpected early storm. Constance and Sarah nursed him back to health, and in gratitude, he wrote an article for a Boston newspaper about the angel of the Wyoming mountains, a woman who'd been left to die but had turned her survival into a mission to save others. The article made Constance briefly famous. Letters arrived from across the country, many from women who felt worthless because of their appearance or circumstances. Constance answered everyone, sharing her story and the wisdom she'd gained, that worth comes from character, not appearance, that cruelty says more about the cruel than their victims, that survival is its own form of victory, and that love finds us in the strangest places when we stop believing it's possible. Thomas Caldwell, the wagon train master who'd abandoned her, died in 1845, bitter and alone. In his final letter to the fort commander, he wrote, "I left Constance Merriweather to die in that storm, and it became the biggest mistake of my life, not because of the fine or the shame, but because I destroyed my own humanity that night. I broke something in myself that never healed. If anyone reads this, let them know. Cruelty has a price, and I've paid it every day since." When Constance learned of his death and read his confession, she cried, not for his suffering, but for the tragedy of a hard heart that had never softened until it was too late. On a winter evening in 1856, 30 years after the night that changed everything, Constance and Silas sat together by the fire in their cabin. They were both in their 50s now, weathered by years of frontier life but still strong, still dedicated to their mission. Sarah had married a good man, a doctor who'd come west to serve the growing settlements, and had given them 3 grandchildren. The rescue station was now operated by a younger couple, trained by the Brennans, while Constance and Silas served as advisors and emergency backup. They'd saved, by their best count, over 200 lives in 3 decades. The network of hope stations they had inspired had saved thousands more. "Do you ever think about that night?" Constance asked, watching the firelight dance across her husband's face. "The night you found me?" "Every time a storm hits," Silas admitted. "I think about how close we came to missing each other entirely. If I'd been 10 minutes later, if your fire had burned out, if I had decided to hunker down instead of pushing through." "But you didn't," Constance said softly. "You kept your promise. You said you wouldn't let me die that night, and you didn't. You've kept me alive in so many ways since then." Silas took her hand, his grip still strong, despite the arthritis that had begun to creep into his joints. "And you've given my life meaning. Before you, I was just surviving. With you, I've been living." Outside, the wind picked up, bringing the first flakes of snow. Somewhere in the darkness, a traveler might be struggling, might be frightened, might be losing hope. But if they looked carefully, they'd see the light burning in the window of Brennan's hope, a beacon that had never gone dark in 30 years, a promise that no one would be left to die alone in the cold. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up the chimney into the night sky. In that warm glow, surrounded by memories and love, Constance Brennan, once abandoned and left for dead, now mother, grandmother, rescuer, and legend, smiled. She'd been given a second chance at life by a stranger's promise in the darkest night, and she'd spent 3 decades making sure that light kept burning for others. The storm outside grew fierce, but inside there was warmth. There was always warmth. There always would be. Because some promises once made burn eternal. Some lights once lit never go out, and some love stories, forged in the crucible of survival and sealed with unbreakable vows, become the legends that light the way for generations to come.